Right, onto this now. The return of Banyana from their successful African Women's Cup of Nations Championship prompted louder calls for gender pay parity in senior sports in the country. But the problem is even wider in a country where nearly 40% of households are headed by women and on an average 40% poorer than male-headed households. In fact, research shows that the guidance on fair remuneration is provided in the Constitution in the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, which promotes equal pay for equal work. Similar initiatives for the private sector are contained in the King Report, which is mandatory for JSE-listed companies. Well, joining us now on whether South Africa can indeed realize pay parity at all its levels is the chairperson at the Commission for Gender Equality, Tamara Mathebula. Mathebula, good evening and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that we've got quite sufficient legislation. I mean, you can look at the amendment made to the Employment Act 55 of 1998. You can look at the Code of Good Practice on Equal Pay, which was also released around 2015. You've got Section 9, Subsection 3 of the Constitution that supports this. We've got PEPUDA. We can go on. We can go on. These legislations are there, but despite these enabling legislation, we are still continuing to see this stagnant median gender pay gap of 23 to 35%. How can South Africa strengthen its mechanism to ensure that we close this gap?
Thank you, Thabo. Thank you very much. And thank you to the listeners. Thank you for having me. I think first and foremost, I just want to take this opportunity to congratulate Banyana for winning the Women's Africa Cup of Nations and beating, some of the biggest clubs that we have in the continent. And then back to your question, I think as South Africa, as you have indicated, I think we have an enabling legislative framework in as so far as closing the pay gap that we currently see. For an example, if you look at the Employment Equity Act, it has very clear guidelines in terms of how South Africa should actually be looking at the code of good practice that clearly stipulates that, in whether in sports, whether is in the workplace, there should be equal pay for the work of equal value. So I think in terms of really looking at strategies of how we can close the gap, first and foremost, as the Gender Commission, we have worked very closely with government, private sector companies, including sports. 2 years ago, we did call the leadership of sports fraternity. We have spoken to the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture Minister in as so far as how we could actually close this pay gap in as so far as sports is concerned. Because I think the case of Banyana really clearly demonstrates that there is a huge pay gap between Banyana and Bafana. So the strategies that need to be put in place, Thabo, is nothing else but to really engage SAFA as the media fraternity, as the Gender Commission and other activists that are really observing how these disparities continue besides or beyond, the 27 years of having such a good legislative environment. Yeah. So if we say let's engage SAFA, SAFA must look at closing the pay gap. That is current between Banyana, Bafana, that's a given. And I think they should source funds or fundraise and really begin to speak to, sponsors that should actually sponsor Banyana so that, their remuneration as well as payment of the team in terms of bonus is really closed. That 23 to 35% gap is closed between Bafana Bafana and Banyana.
Yeah.
And the same goes to the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. I think they should really have allocations. They should be consulted in terms of looking at these remunerations for both Banyana and Bafana Bafana. I think lastly, it will be critically important for the sponsors to really come on board. I mean, really, we have looked at how Banyana have played so well in the country and outside the country, and the sponsors really would be investing wisely on the Banyana in terms of really closing that gap and making sure that, they, look at the standard and putting up the standard from where it is right now, and really encouraging, our stars in as so far as the national women's team is concerned to a higher level. So those are, for me, the key strategies. And I think as the Commission, we will continue to really engage at a high level. We will continue to monitor these discriminations, which are clearly stipulated in the PEPUDA and other legislative frameworks and acts.
Now, there are sanctions, in my thinking, that are attached to non-delivery of these duties. Do you think the penalties for non-compliance are sufficiently significant?
The penalties are not sufficiently, implemented and effective, I must say, because if you would remember, Thabo, in 2019, we did engage the leadership of SAFA, and we did talk about the same thing, the pay gap between Banyana, Bafana. We made recommendations that were binding, and up until today, those recommendations have not been implemented. And again, it's something else to actually call people, subpoena people as a Chapter 9 institution to come and appear before you, you talk, you make recommendations, you send them away for implementation. But if Chapter 9 institutions and other institutions are not given a bigger mandate through an act, or a legislative framework to really say there should be penalties, and these penalties should be X, Y, and Z, and we're giving you powers beyond the powers that we have to actually make sure that should the penalties be given, they are implemented. Thabo, I think for me that's quite key, and this perhaps can even be extended to Parliament in terms of holding, government departments accountable for really not actually implementing the pay gap issues and addressing them to the satisfaction of many South Africans and many institutions or that are actually promoting constitutional democracy in the country.
So I heard SAFA President Denny Jordan, for example, saying, well, SAFA will need to go and speak to the clubs because SAFA itself cannot impose on the clubs what they need to be paying players, right? So it's almost like everybody will be passing the buck. I don't know if we could come up with a way that is enforcing transparency, right? So we use a measurable and an observable criteria to determine pay. So clubs would really say, this is how job classification system works, and therefore if you've been at the club this long, you play this much, you play this position, this is what you get paid. I mean, more or less, without, of course, letting us in on much of their trading secrets. But do you think something like that could certainly be something that would be pushed for and would allow, for example, the Gender Commission to be able to monitor effectively?
Absolutely. Look, I am really for consultation processes, which I think for me, that's what Denny Jordan was actually talking about, to say that perhaps we need to go and consult, which is one of the longest process that is being taken by the SAFA leadership currently. And I think perhaps in the principle of transparency, consultation, they still want to go and consult with the clubs. And I'm saying longest process. I think we need an intervention now, Thabo, what we need to do is to make sure that the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture be consulted by SAFA to say that this is the current situation, this is the gap that we are currently having. Can we make sure that we close the gap? Rather than going to the clubs, because the clubs will actually be saying different things. This matter is urgent, and I think we need to actually come up as SAFA as well as Department of Education with a tool that will, or a strategy that will actually say, this is how we close the gap, and this is when we close the gap, as a matter of fact. And then we agree, and this is the information that we would need as the Commission for Gender Equality to be able to monitor what SAFA as well as the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture have agreed upon in terms of closing the gap, in terms of, the mechanism of closing that gap. And then these are the areas where we will actually, after a couple of months or years, say, have you been able to implement A, X, Y, and Z?
Now, of course, gender stereotypes and patriarchal tendencies also play a big part of this particular problem. Are we putting enough demand on society as a whole, particularly to face this reality and deal with this?
Thabo, the Constitution is very clear on the non-discrimination. And if you go to the Constitution and really look at what the Bill of Rights states, that, no one can actually be discriminated on the basis of gender, on the gender stereotypes, age and marital status and all of that. For us, if you really interpret this, you can directly interpret it as part of, gender stereotyping to say that this particular group, no matter how well or how good they are, but because they are this particular part of the society, they are not Banyana, Bafana Bafana, they are Banyana Banyana. So this is what we think we can actually pay them. This is the bonus. And here, as the Gender Commission, the reason why we have been very, vocal about this is that, the very same young girls should actually aspire, young girls out there should actually aspire to be in the women's club. And the very same club that we're currently having, the team, is here with me today. And these are the issues that we are talking about to say, we're looking just beyond an individual. We're looking at, we've been listening to stories of how, Banyana football players are coming from ordinary rural areas where there is absolutely nothing or no hope or nothing to really look forward to. And they have made it, and they are where they are today. And the only source of income is really this. And this is why we are saying close this gap, because we are also looking at societal issues, we are looking at economic issues, we are looking at, how do we really close, the youth unemployment issue. So it's bigger than just, miss the eye. So there is a lot that needs to be addressed by really speeding up the process of closing the gap and making sure that, there's equal pay for work of equal value.
Tamara, as always, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on tonight on In Focus, Chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality there.